So the Canon 5D Mark IV. This is the last of Canon's 5D series, a series that has been tremendously impactful in the photography and video industries. The cameras that came in this series before this one were amazing cameras, but how does the Mark IV stand up? This camera is maybe one of the last best DSLRs camera has made. And now that Canon's moved on to doing mirrorless cameras, this may be one of the last great DSLRs we'll see from them. It's a camera that is widely used and gets a lot of good praise. But is it great for all shooting situations? To start off with the stats, this is a full frame EF mount 30.4 megapixel camera. Its raw photo size is a whopping 6,720 by 4,480 pixels. And for video, it shoots up to 4K, 30 frames per second, and 60 frames per second at 1080p.
It has one SD card slot and one CF card slot.
My first impression with this camera is that it's a really solid workhorse camera. It has a great build to it. It's a little bit on the heavier side, but that's something I actually like when it comes to cameras. Its shutter is really fast, and I really like how the buttons are laid out. Everything is really easily accessible on the camera and on the screen itself. The screen doesn't fold out, but it is a touchscreen, which is a step up from previous 5D versions. And the small screen on top of the camera is really helpful to set up your shots really quickly. On the photography side, I've been very impressed with the cameras that have come out. The cameras that have come out of these photos. The photos that have come out of this camera. And there goes Mooney. I've just yet to take a bad photo with it. It just works. 30 megapixels is a lot. And I know it's not as much as some cameras out there, but it's still more than enough for high quality printing. And speaking of high quality, these are high quality pixels too. I end up having a lot of latitude with this camera when working with raw photos. Not only with the colors and the exposure, but also in the cropping as well. I can crop in a fair amount with this camera and still have a really high quality photo that I can print. The colors are just some of the best I think I've ever worked with. Canon continues to deliver with their color space. This certainly will be a primary camera that I use for photography. But for video, maybe not as much. The camera boasts good stats for video, just maybe not as good as some of its competitors at around the same price. It's the first 5D model to shoot in 4K, but the 4K mode does come with a crop factor, which isn't typical for full frame cameras. You can get C-Log3 loaded in the camera, which is really great, but it is an extra expense that you have to do. And if you bought the camera without it, you're gonna have to send it in to Canon to have them load it on for you. The problem when it comes to video is this camera exists in a world where there are a lot of other options. Back when, let's say, the 5D Mark II came out, there really weren't any other options to shoot video in that kind of style on a DSLR and in such a small format. And that's why that camera was so revolutionary to the film industry. It was really the first time that this type of video was possible for people on a lower budget. They could use their photography lenses on this photography camera and shoot really high quality, almost cinema looking video. And then that was the start of a long line of DSLRs that were delivering high quality video and eventually mirrorless cameras that are delivering high quality video. It's great that Canon is continuing to do that and continuing to improve on the video for their 5D series. It's just that it's a little too late when it comes to the 5D Mark IV. This particular camera, when it comes to videography, doesn't completely satisfy what videographers and filmmakers are looking for nowadays. Now, I would say based off of that this camera can function as a pretty good B cam, especially if you're already using this camera for photography, instead of having to rent or buy a completely new camera to serve as your B cam in production. All I would say is if you're working with another camera that has a log profile, be sure to get the C-Log profile installed into this camera. Also, if you're primarily a photographer and you're looking to transition into video, you already have what you need right here to do that. And you can still use the same lenses you've been using. Eventually, if you get more into it, you may want to make an upgrade to a different camera, but it's definitely a good start. For me, I was sort of in the opposite camp. I learned video first, and then I learned photography. So in terms of photography, this is a good step for me. I've shot photos on cameras in the past, but never to the level of what this camera can produce. I also already have equipment that is better suited for video productions. But in a pinch, this camera can step in if I needed to. Some other minor downsides, this screen is nice, but I wish it was slightly nicer, and maybe a flip out screen. I've just gotten used to that with some other cameras. You also need to buy hefty SD cards and hefty CF cards to film in 4K, but hopefully you already have some of those if you've been doing this for a while. Overall, I agree with the general consensus about this camera. It really is a workhorse camera that can last for a long time. It does the job, and it does the job well. Is it a monumental jump from the 5Ds in the past? Not really, but it's a solid option for somebody who wants to step up and stick with an EF mount camera. Now, one of the biggest factors to consider with the purchase of this camera is the new RF mirrorless cameras that Canon has. The truth is, those cameras have some technology that this camera just doesn't possess, such as an electronic shutter and viewfinder, and of course, RF lenses. Their video stats are superior as well. However, so far in my specific experience, I found that the picture quality out of the 5D Mark IV actually is superior to the Canon R6 when using the same lenses and equipment. I haven't used the R5 yet, but I would suspect the picture quality out of that camera would be superior to this camera because of its higher megapixel count. But it also comes in at a much higher price point. As with this option, you don't have to necessarily make that investment just yet. My conclusion with the 5D Mark IV is that it's a great camera to get now and to already have and keep. It's kind of like a good, solid, safe ETF in the stock market. But granted, I would only recommend this camera if you plan on shooting photography with it. If you're just shooting video, I would recommend something else. But the thing is, like, I don't know why anyone would buy this camera without using it for photography. That's what it's best designed for and best known for. It's like I'm not gonna buy a Red to shoot stills with it. But if you are solely a photographer or do both, this is a solid option for you. So like I said, it just works. It's well built. It's a workhorse camera that can handle pretty much any type of shooting situation, and it gives you the tools to succeed. And that's what matters most in the end. Do some of the new mirrorless cameras do that too? Absolutely, if not better in some of them. But you just need to decide if that's a commitment you're willing to make. It's one eventually that you may have to make, but today is not necessarily that day. If you have a solid lineup of EF lenses you've been using for a while, this camera will work great for you without having to invest in buying any more new lenses. It's a camera that for photographers just does the job and will do it well for a long time to come, just like all the 5Ds before this have been like too.